Yep, it's time for the news. We're going to get started right away with this Saturday edition of KP Video News. And as you can see, I have on my John McCain, USS John McCain t-shirt. Fuck you, DC Dunce. Here we go. We have the first story here. We got a lawsuit. Employee face racial slurs and dolls depicting lynchings. A Phoenix moving company allowed a manager to repeatedly harass an African-American employee with frequent use of racial slurs and dolls that simulated lynchings, forcing the employee to find another job due to hostile work environment, according to the EEO, that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Gary Carpenter, who was manager at Arizona Discount Movers, is accused of, in the commission's lawsuit, of calling employee Clinton Lee the N-word almost every day and making comments such as, "If you're not white, you're right," and the beginning of morning staff meeting saying "white power" and making a Nazi salute. When Lee would pick up his paychecks, Carpenter would often tell Lee to leave because employees were holding a Klan meeting, according to the suit. The manager also displayed figurines that simulated lynchings, according to the EEO complaint. He placed on Lee's desk a statue of a jockey holding a whip tied in a noose and labeled it the statue Clint. The lawsuit contends. The commissioner said Carpenter also spray painted a troll doll black, hung it from a hook in the middle of the facility, pointed to it and said, "Hey Clint, look, that's you." After Lee complained, business owner Amy Hanna told Lee he could take the doll down if he didn't like it. Lee left the job in 2014 due to abuse and was out of work for months, according to the commission. Initially, Lee tried to justify the harassment as jokes or something he could just ignore, but over time it became increasingly stressful for him. When the troll doll was hung in his workplace, he simply left that day. His wife saw the stress he was under and told him he didn't have to continue to work in that type of environment. The employer tried to pass it off as, "Oh, this is what they do." He said it's amazing this sort of conduct still exists today. Arizona Discount Movers tried to correct non-racially motivated problems that Lee reported and denied creating a hostile work environment. Lee was not subjected to objectively severe or pervasive enough conduct that created an environment that was a reasonable person would be likely to find hostile or abusive. That's what the company said in court. They didn't think anything that this guy Carpenter did was abusive or hostile. I mean, hanging nooses and calling the man a nigger every day, and doing all this stuff in effigies, and the people that own the company is like, "Oh, well, he didn't do nothing wrong." Okay, now here's the same guy. The racist Carpenter was convicted in 2018 of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and was sentenced to 5 years in prison and lost his job with the moving company, the records show. Arizona Discount Movers agreed to settle the lawsuit Friday without admitting fault by paying Lee $54,000. The company also must provide Lee with a written apology and a positive reference letter, develop anti-discrimination policies, and prevent future racially discriminative practices. So anybody that lives in over in Arizona, in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and if you black, at all costs, avoid Arizona Discount Movers. Don't give them your business. They don't deserve it. They don't deserve your money. And here's a story here about after 30 years, this is story number 2. After 30 years behind bars, 1980s DC drug kingpin Rayford Edmonds III returns to court in hopes of early release. With his custom-tailored silk clothes and multi-carat diamond jewelry, and according to law enforcement officials, as much as $2 million a week from the sales of cocaine and crack cocaine coming in. Rayford Edmonds III was the biggest drug dealer in the nation's capital during the 1980s. After he was sent to prison for life, he remained among some a living legend. In movies, TV, and rap lyrics, Edmonds was often glorified as a calculating, business-savvy gangster. Even multi-platinum selling rapper Jay-Z once rhymed on Can I Live? No more Big Willie, my game has grown, prefer you call me William, blah, blah, blah. But it is largely unknown that Edmonds was doing something frowned upon by those in the streets, cooperating with federal prosecutors in the hope that he might someday walk free, also known as snitching in Edmonds' world. On Wednesday, Edmonds will return for the first time in 17 years to his hometown, where authorities say his army of dealers also sold $20 crack rocks, contributing to addiction and rising crime that devastated the city of Washington, D.C. So he's trying to get his life sentence overturned. He was sentenced to life without parole in 1990 after being convicted of federal drug distribution and a reign that lasted from 1995 until his spring arrest in 1989. So he's trying to say they later called for Evans' life sentence to be reduced to 40 years. So they're trying to get it dropped down from life to 40 years. So here's the Midwest gangster, Larry Hoover, notorious former leader of the Gangster Disciples in Chicago. Larry Hoover is suing ADX Florence, and ADX Florence is the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, which they call that the new Alcatraz, which has been described as the worst prison in the world because he and his partner claim the prison has intentionally isolated him from his family. Wendy Jenkins, which is Larry Hoover's girlfriend, and let's see, they said the United States ADS. She took her grandson down there to visit Larry Hoover's grandson. So it says, notorious former leader of the Chicago gang, the Gangster D's, that's the Gangster Disciples, Larry Hoover, also known as King Larry, was given 6 life sentences, 150 to 283 years for murder, conspiracy, extortion, and continuing to engage in the criminal enterprise. However, while incarcerated, Hoover transformed the Gangster Disciples into a community group called Growth and Development, which focused on making positive gains in Chicago black community like education, entrepreneurship, and wellness. But prison officials and prosecutors interpreted his attempts as subversive, criminally genius, and disingenuous ways for him to remain the leader of the Gangster Disciples while lying his way into possible clemency. But many of Hoover's supporters say his community work is virtual and genuine, and that Hoover is a political prisoner. Hoover hasn't been free since he was apprehended for murdering a drug dealer in 1973, but during his time, 69-year-old Jenkins hasn't wavered in her dedication to him and their family. During an interview, she warned Essence that she might have to leave abruptly. I never know when he's going to call, she explained. Even though Jenkins is devoted to Hoover, aiming to take their family to visit him 3 to 4 times a year, the super maximum prison he's in doesn't make it easy for them. So what they're trying to do is, during one trip in question, the guards decided a piece of the young boy's costume, which was guy had a Batman costume on, is a gang symbol. They commanded Jenkins to remove it. Jenkins protesting the child wasn't and still isn't a gang member. Also, the piece of cloth was connected to the rest of the costume, held together by a thread. But soon she had to relent, or else they would not be able to see Larry again for at least a year. Jenkins ripped off the offending piece of her grandson's costume, the thread popping in frame. So they what they've been doing was, whenever they come up there to visit him, it's always something. Uh, Jenkins had lived most of her life loving Larry Hoover through glass, through the brutal intermediaries of metal detectors and fences and phones and guards and inspections and visitation terminations. For Jenkins, this lawsuit is about fighting for her family's dignity. It's about making sure that Larry Hoover isn't isolated from his loved ones. It's about resisting dehumanization and affirming her family's right to be a family and communicate with each other. So that's Larry Hoover, and he got his girl, Wendy. It's been a lifelong, partner with kids. They got kids and grandkids and stuff, and they're having a hard time every time they go to try to visit him. So they're filing a lawsuit against Florence, Colorado Supermax Federal Prison, the new Alcatraz. Yep, that sounds like a rap.